Okay. Hello, Glenn.
Hi.
So I was going to start with how this came about that I got told by Natalie, who's organized this conversation between us, that a friend of a friend of a friend, blah, 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 saw an image of mine that's up at the Walker Gallery in Liverpool. And I have three images on display there in an exhibition called Conversations, which is 40 Black women and non-binary people
Uh,
together. I haven't actually been to see the exhibition yet, but I'm very excited to see it. But in one of the images, I think the photo is called like Rene's studio or something, and it's this mug from my studio that's on top of some books, and the mug says something like "Your country calls upon you," and it's like this like reproduction of a British like wartime sign or something like
right.
that. And in the mug, it's like I just used it to put stuff in. I think there's like darts with the Union Jack on and like a Afro comb, but it's sat on top of some books. One of them is called Never Again, which is about British riots in Nottingham, I think. It's kind of like about Rock Against Racism and the Anti-Nazi League is what it is about.
Right.
And
Right.
underneath that book is your book, Glenn Ligon, Encounters and Collisions, uh,
Ah,
which I obviously just had in my studio. And it wasn't purposeful that this was like part of the image, I suppose. Like I don't really know what I was doing when I was taking that image, mostly centered around the mug and obviously these different layers of identity that make up one's self and also one's studio. So I have Glenn and then I have, this very British based book and then this mug. But text is such a large part of that image, I suppose, because it's telling so many different stories. But so someone saw that image was in that exhibition and thought Rene should speak to Glenn, which is a huge blessing on for me because as I mentioned to you when we spoke the other day that I'm a crazy fan, like big, and I think that show Encounters and Collisions was in Liverpool, no?
yes, it started at Nottingham Contemporary and then moved to Tate Liverpool. But what's interesting about the title of that book or the show in general was it was about juxtapositions. It was about thinking of artists that I was in dialogue with directly, but also artists that I wanted to see in dialogue. So it's quite ironic that that image which would bring us together because the show was about dialogues that I was having, but dialogues that I imagined I wanted to have. So one of the things in that catalog uh, are letters that I wrote to artists like Zoe Leonard, who's a friend, and I'm a huge fan of Adrian Piper, who I've met, but also Jean-Michel Basquiat, who long dead and never met him really, but wrote him a letter, you know, or Buford Delaney, another painter that I admire, I've never met, passed away long before my time as an artist, but influential on my practice. So I wrote him a letter, sort of explaining the show, kind of asking permission, you
Mm,
know.
that's so nice. And also everything in that, did you kind of did some curating within that display as well, right? Like there was works.
Yeah, so well, basically the whole exhibition was a curatorial project. So I picked all of the artists in the show and worked with Alex Farquharson, who is the director of Nottingham Contemporary. He's now the director of the Tate Britain.
Yeah.
Um, but worked with him to sort of do a show that could have as many artists as possible in it, in dialogue with work of mine, but also in dialogue with each other. Yeah.
Amazing. It's
So, for example, there was a de Kooning next to Buford Delaney. Now, these artists knew each other in Greenwich Village, but I'd never ever seen their work together in a show. And I
oh
thought, why not? You
yeah. Well,
know?
it's also interesting that yeah, that book and that whole thing is bringing this conversation together because we're here in dialogue about all over the place, which is also an intervention and a kind of how are you describing it? What you've done?
Oh, um, I don't know if I have a good description of what it is exactly because the process of working on the show at the Fitzwilliam, was so organic in a way. It started as a space for me at the Fitzwilliam to show these black moon jars, these big ceramic jars that were based on Korean ceramic tradition, specifically moon jars, which were these sort of big white ceramic vases that have a long history in Korea and Japan. And me wanting to make ceramics, but I'm not a ceramicist, so I worked with a Korean-born ceramicist living in Japan, and we made these black moon jars, which is sort of against the tradition in some ways, but my intervention in the tradition. Um, so initially, the show was an opportunity to show that work in the UK at the Fitzwilliam. But then the show kind of grew from there, you know. The director of the museum asked me if there other work I think would make sense to show with it. So I had a proposal for a neon that's on the facade of the museum that is based on a Cavafy poem, Waiting for the Barbarians. But then it got good to me, you know.
It goes to the whole gallery, or every gallery.
Off you go. And kept being offered more and more spaces to work with and began to learn more about the museum's culture. It's a comprehensive collection, mostly coming from alumni from the university in Cambridge. Going back to the 1800s. So all the problems of empire and collecting and all of that, you know, with also with the contemporary collection as well. Um, a print department and the Egyptology department, the Asian ceramics department, and like all the things. I just started working with various curators of various departments and just kind of nosing about, you know. Um, which is an amazing process. Just because, you know, I'm not an expert in any of the fields, any of the departments in which I had dialogues with. I'm not a prints expert. I'm not a ceramicist expert. So I relied on a lot of the curatorial staff to provide this expertise. But what I realized over time is, and I'm sure you know this, but you know very well in your practice, that what you're interested in as an artist in relationship to a museum or an exhibition space, its history, its narrative is quite different maybe than what a curator or a director
Yeah.
is interested in or may be willing to say, you know,
Yeah.
or willing to do. But what was nice about the Fitzwilliam was I felt like I had uh, a lot of permission, um, which in a curious way, I had to remind myself that I had and remind myself to ask for, you know?
I was
Uh,
going to just say permission, but I was going to say that you gave them permission almost more.
well, in some ways, yes, you're right. You're right. But you know, and maybe it's a generational thing because I think of you as quite fearless in terms of just
Really?
the exhibitions that I have seen, you know, looking online, and we can talk more about those too, but thinking through what is required of the exhibition space for you to present your work.
Mhm.
Um, and I feel like in some ways, generationally, I take strength from that because I know that I have some kind of prohibitions. My first instinct is like, oh, I want to do X, but they won't let me do that.
Mm. Mm.
So if you're in a situation where you're being told whatever you want to do is fine, still there's this internal, like, they won't let me do that, you
Yeah,
know,
definitely.
as if they're doing me a favor by letting me exhibit, you
I
know.
can't believe that you still feel like that. That's kind of
Oh, yes, it's a constant
yeah,
struggle,
it always
which,
feels like that. I guess in terms of I've not really thought about it in terms of this word permission before in the relationship between yeah, the space and you and taking up that space and how much you're allowed of that because it does always feel like you're coming up against something. There's always a problem that you have to figure out.
right, right.
But with this show, Yeah, it didn't seem like there was much you had to get around. I'm sure that there was, but you know, thinking about the flower room with all of the oil paintings, that abundance of work um, being available to you in that one go, right?
Right.
Wasn't
And
all available, right? They had to make it available.
yes, have them make it available. So basically, there's a, second Lord Fairhaven had a collection of botanical art, drawings, paintings, etchings, I believe, um, and bequeathed them to the Fitzwilliam. So
Mm-hmm.
there are hundreds and hundreds of things. And they're in a particular gallery. That's where they're normally they show them, but they don't show hundreds and hundreds of things, Maybe there were 40, 50 things in that gallery. And I thought, 19th century display in the museum from pictures that I'd seen doing research at Fitzwilliam was, museums were hung floor to ceiling, you
Yeah.
know, all up and down the wall. And I just thought, well, in some ways it would be just, a beautiful room, floor to ceiling. Just very basic, like, oh,
I
this
just
would look
want to see that.
this would look pretty. It
Yeah.
look real pretty if the flowers were hung floor to ceiling. I mean, to be honest, that was my first thought. But then
Well,
I also realized, when you start to think about it, well, what are these paintings, 17th, 18th century Dutch still life paintings of flowers and animals, lizards, butterflies, birds, what are they actually representing? And you realize they're representing empire, they're representing colonialism, they're representing conquest and imperialism, The flowers are coming from their holdings, in Brazil, they're coming from Suriname, they're coming from Turkey,
they're a portrait of power.
They're a portrait of power, arranged very artfully in vases, And so the abundance of the display that I proposed in that room was also kind of the wealth extraction and the abundance that is produced by imperialism. And so both of those things are held at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the structural issue that was around the show was that, museum stuff like, oh, if we're going to bring all those paintings out, they have to be condition reported. The frames or some of them need to be restored. Like all this kind of
Yeah.
back of house stuff that I wasn't aware of when I just said, let's hang 100 paintings up
Yeah.
there,
But
not
they made
realizing.
it happen.
Yeah. But that's what I mean, that the museum allowed me to do that. Nobody said, no, we can't do that because it's going to take weeks to install that room. That one room is going to take weeks to install. A lot of this work has to go to conservation first, et
Uh,
cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All the structural issues around that.
yeah.
It was sort of like, yes, that's a great idea. And the irony is, you were talking about permission. The curator in that gallery said, even as they were hanging that part of the show, her colleagues were saying, "Oh, this looks amazing,"
Yeah. Because
you
it's,
know. And I just thought all I did was hang what you had. That's
yeah.
all I did.
Yeah, it's so interesting. There seems to be like a gratefulness to have you there from the walls of the museum. I think like how grateful those walls must be to be able to hang that amount of work, to show as much work as possible almost in one go is
Right.
incredible. But it
Right.
reminded me of my mum's living room actually, which was very interesting.
Tell
Because
me about that.
my mum has always loved a salon hang in her houses.
Right.
And she's always loved collecting, you know, she kind of like she has a few of these oil paintings from like charity shops. So she'll go around and find
Right.
them and then put them together all in one room. And it's kind of, she's a maximalist. So it's quite overwhelming and stuffy and almost this like set. It feels like a set in her house, which is, I always say it's like she lives in this doll's house where she just goes and like plays around. And every time I go, that things are different. But it was kind of interesting thinking about these floral oil paintings that she has so many of, and in the home of a working class woman, and how it's
Right.
translated and been pulled so far away from the original source that I guess it comes down to taste.
Mhm.
and how taste has changed now, and how maximalism is now kind of a code, or like it's like a derogatory term in terms of style. I think now, especially in like interiors in England anyway, it's kind of like there's like a kitschness, you know.
Right, right,
Into this room of this museum that reminded me of my mother's living room was really interesting, especially
right.
because this show is so much about these translations, these different forms of translation.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, I don't know what that means, or what that feeling was, but I think maybe it was like an overwhelming feeling of, oh, this is familiar to me. And that's so strange that a
Mhm.
room with that much symbolism and codedness of like, yeah, imperialism and power and colonialism would feel familiar, and I would feel at home in that.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, so much of your project has been thinking about, it, your centralness and also being on the margins of what we might think of as Britishness, and thinking through that is, I think, interesting in relation to, as you say, the display of objects in that exhibition and the idea of its familiarity alongside, the familiarity of the display in that relating to your mom's, the way she hung pictures in her house, alongside these questions of like British identity or colonial identity or the identity of empire,
Yeah, yeah,
holding both of those things at the same time within this display of, their Dutch still life
yeah.
paintings, but they're collected by a British collector who has a very particular kind of lineage that they're trying to attach themselves to by this display. Because initially this would be in their grand country house.
Do we know why he got rid of them? Did he die?
I think it was, a lot of, post-war, I'm sure a lot of these houses were a burden. There were taxes, there was, the donation becomes a way of some tax alleviation, but also there's these are permanent display in a way, that that gallery is particular to Lord Fairhaven's collection in the Fitzwilliam. So it is a kind of permanence, you know, in
Mm.
terms of it's like naming a gallery,
Yeah,
basically. Here's the pictures, here's the money, here's the bequest. But for that, you have to keep this name up in perpetuity. My name, my bequest is up in perpetuity.
yeah. I mean, yeah, that makes me think about how when I was walking through the show with Habda, who curated it, right?
Yeah, Abdul Rashid was the
Yeah, curated
curator with me, I guess.
it. Um,
Yeah.
and you mentioned repeatedly this idea of trouble and beauty that you kept coming back to, which is kind of where I feel is the line through my work too.
Hmm.
The line is this, I'm always constant. I think that this idea of like all of these things meaning both, or all of it, and this kind of blessing and burden of all of these things. So the beauty of these paintings and a lot of the other objects in the show, and also your works that you've made, and then this kind of real violence that goes on behind
Hmm.
scenes, or actually kind of just in front of your eyes as well in some points. Uh,
Right.
yeah, thinking about that and how, yeah, how did that feel working with a collection, I suppose?
Right. Well, there were interesting moments where, I in doing the research around the show, one of the things I was interested in is and it's a theme in your work too, is sort of presence and absence, revealing and hidden. And
Yeah.
and sometimes things that are quite in plain sight, but also hidden
Mm.
because the discourse around them kind of denies them. So, for example, there was one gallery where uh, it was the early Renaissance gallery in the museum, and it has a very beautiful wallpaper, sort of golden wallpaper. That's from the 1924, I think, was put up. And where paintings had been put on that wallpaper and left for a long time, the original gold color of that wallpaper is there, but the whole rest of the wall has faded to a sort of coppery brown. So when you take the paintings off, you see the outlines in gold of where the paintings were. And I just thought it was very beautiful. But I thought, here's permission. Oh, we should just empty out one of these bays in this gallery, but they won't let me do that.
When I saw that room, I was like, oh, because it's so much evidence, there's so much
Right,
evidence that isn't being covered up almost.
right, right. It is the exhibition history of the museum through absence, basically.
Yeah.
But what I put in that gallery was one painting, a adoration painting, Adoration of the Magi. And in that painting, Balthasar, one of the Magi, come to worship newly born Christ child. He's black, and he's meant to be a symbol of, sort of Africa, basically. And this painting is from the 1400s. But later in the museum's history, somebody writes a wall label. I think it's in the 20s, maybe, and says, "Oh, Balthasar attended by a Negro page." And I thought, oh, Balthasar is not black anymore because the Negro page is there, but Balthasar's race is not mentioned. So I thought, oh, so interesting that Balthasar, in many, many paintings at that period when that painting was painted, is depicted as black, but over time, that falls away. So I wrote a wall label that sort of explained that history, but also said something cheeky, which no curator would put, like, he sure looks like a brother to me. Just in a way as a joke, but also just a way to point out the how the curatorial voice shapes what we see.
Mhm.
But also to sort of point out that my voice as an artist is different than the curatorial voice,
Yeah.
and to imply there are different ways to read the same object.
Yeah.
Uh,
So just as a black person looking at blackness.
right. Black
You
person looking at blackness is like, he looked like a brother to me. What are they talking about? You know? But
But
yeah, just inserting that reading, like that, in a way, a common sense reading. It's like, what are they
yeah.
talking about? Into because we often, visitors often look to the labels as authority. This is what this painting means. And so I wanted my labels that are alongside the object labels that were already existing to be a counterpoint in some
Yeah.
ways, or suggest to the viewer that, like, there are many ways to read these objects, and or there are many ways that museums operate that are not necessarily their choices.
Yeah.
They don't have to be this way.
How do you see your labels in relation to textbooks that you make that are in the show?
In relationship to, sorry.
The paintings with your text paintings. You know,
Interesting.
what's
Yeah. Oh, interesting question. Because I deliberately, in some ways, I felt like this is a bit controversial to say, that the labels were half the show for me. Writing the wall labels was half the show for me. That was the fun part for me. Like, if I didn't have my own work in that show, I would have been fine in some ways. For me, it was more about reframing what was already there.
Mm.
But I think that is probably a strain in my work anyway. If you think about a drawing that says Negro Sunshine, well, that phrase, Negro Sunshine, is from a Gertrude Stein novel, which is purportedly, describing the lives of Black characters, but is quite brutal
Yeah.
in its description of those Black characters. Stein, in that novella, it's called Three Lives, in the Melanchthon section where she's writing about her Black characters, she's not really interested in their internal lives. She's you know, um, and so she says of one of the characters, she doesn't have the warm, broad glow of Negro sunshine, But of course, that's a joke, Black sunshine. That's, it's Stein making a bit of a joke, but also Stein kind of participating in stereotypes. Black people are always smiling, Black people are always happy. That's what that's about.
Yeah.
Um, but, I think we, as Black practitioners, artists of color, have always had to, in some ways, read around things, and I want to get to your tattoo as the way of thinking,
Yeah.
reading around things to find other meanings in it. So when I read Stein's novel with her very brutal descriptions of Black interior lives and Black characters, I thought, oh, but Negro Sunshine, that's good.
Actually, I keep now thinking about you saying sure looks like a brother to me and how that works as well when you're reading something, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna have
Mm-hmm.
that actually.
Right, right, right.
You can keep that as something that I can warm up and that I'm not gonna let you keep in this like, yeah, darkness, which, for lack of a better word.
Right, right. But I think, I would love to talk to you about the tattoo process, the decision to what exactly born British, die British, and
Yeah.
having it tattooed by this very problematic, famous but problematic tattoo artist. Like, could you talk about that as an intervention in kind of what
Yeah,
the original phrase meant and what it means to have that inscribed on the body,
totally. Yeah, I mean, people who are listening, I have an artwork called was kind of two, it becomes a different artwork every day, I suppose, because it is this performance at the end of the day, a lifelong durational performance that I have to.
Wow. Yeah, 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 yeah.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
so originally, yeah, I got a tattoo that says Born British, Die British on my back. The filming of that process is called Born British, Die British, but then there's an image also of it that I got Derek Ridgers, who's a famous, or could be more famous actually, subcultural photographer
Okay.
of British subcultures. He took from like his body of work, his 70s and 80s, and a lot of the pictures that he has taken have been of tattoos, oftentimes racist tattoos from skinheads and um, mostly skinheads, to be honest. And so I asked him to take a photo of the tattoo, and that piece is called Destination Departure.
Ah,
So the original idea was honestly, I think you do this a lot with your work as well. I know that you do, is you kind of don't know what you're doing until it's done or until you're experiencing it.
right,
How,
right, right.
if we think about having the idea, sorry, my dog, in the beginning was about my obsession with what Britishness is. And I've been asked a lot about why or like um what my thoughts on it are. And I have often said I'm not that interested in my thoughts on it, but it's thoughts on me, you know?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And
Beautiful.
yeah,
Uh-huh.
I think that that's because that's what I have to deal with. That is what I've been burdened with. Uh,
Mhm.
and that kind of feels like all that matters. And so when I saw this tattoo in research, I look at images a lot, or like constantly am obsessed with images and I use them to learn. And I came across this really pixelated tattoo of some white flesh. I must have Googled something about like, right-wing politics in England or something, blah, blah, blah. This tattoo came up of this man that had born British, die British tattooed. And I thought, wow. And this was 2020. So this was when we were going through Black Lives Matter. And
Mhm.
I was thinking about death. Obviously, we couldn't not think about death. And I think I thought, what does it mean to have that tattooed on you? And is there a way to escape this? Is there a way to escape this? There was no way to escape the birth of Britishness and having that original burden put on me.
Right,
Is there
right.
a way to escape the death? I don't
Yeah.
know, you know?
You
Um,
said somewhere you're birthed into this thing that's awaiting you, Britishness, which is a beautiful way to think about it. Like
yeah,
it pre-exists you, but because you're born into it, you get to intervene in it too, because
yeah.
you're a part of it.
And there's this beautiful, yeah, oh, I don't know what the term is. You know, I get a shock because it's on my back, and it's really interesting that one of the only times I remember or that I feel it, like if I feel it heavy, is when I'm not in England.
Right,
Because
right.
like if I'm on holiday and I've got like more skin showing or my back showing,
Mhm.
and the interpretation of what that tattoo must, like how people must think of that, having that on my body is immediately I'm like, oh, I want them to know that they're safe around me. Because I don't know if they're seeing Britishness or if they're seeing blackness first. I don't know which one they're seeing, but having
Right.
a tattoo um means so many different things in different contexts. Um, and but for me, there's that cheekiness always. There's that undermining of what Britishness is in that because it's so not synonymous with a body that is mine. Um,
Right,
and so
right.
to have it inscribed on this skin, especially by Lau Hardy, who, yeah, famously tattooed a lot of problematic tattoos in his time. He's also then covered them up since. Um,
Oh, wow.
which
Oh,
he
wow.
told me while he was doing my tattoo. Like yeah, people from the 80s coming back with, you know, swastikas and having them covered over. Um, and this, you know, continuous the way I guess it's just this way of the world. I think you speak about it in America when you're speaking about your America neon, you know.
Right, right.
I think it's
America as this, problematic word that is constantly contested and bandied about as if we all know what it means, but we don't know what it means. And I've done a series of neons that use that word and flip it upside down and make it covered in black paint or make it blink off and on obnoxiously as it does, just as a way to think about yeah, that this word, is constantly shifting and is under debate and is taken up by the right wing, the left wing in different ways, and is contested,
yeah,
and is always going to be contested. And as you were talking, I was thinking about David Hammonds, who's an artist I love, and his African American flag,
mhm.
which is basically the United States flag, but done instead of
And
red, white, blue, done in red, black, and green, which is a sort of the colors of Marcus Garvey and the Back to Africa movement. And at a certain point, apparently, I think this was in the 90s. He used to get these flags made in Mexico cheaper because no US manufacturer would make them
wow.
because they decided it could be read anti-patriotically.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
And we are back to that moment now with the election of Trump, where there's a chilling effect on and a gathering up of what it means to be American under a right wing, banner.
Yeah.
So,
And this idea of having this tattoo on my back is similar to that kind of like, well, what do you mean about it not being patriotic? Because I was born here and I'm like a side effect, to and and I'm happy to bring that to people's attention that you cannot define what Britishness is or the Britishness or the patriotic thing that you're clinging onto so desperately does not exist because I exist,
Right, right,
right?
right,
So
right.
blow it the fuck up and get rid of it. It's boring. And
Hmm.
it's a waste of your time
Hmm.
because I am here. We're here now
Hmm.
in this
Hmm.
way and continue to evolve. So yeah, it's a bit like yeah, I don't know, I keep coming back to that cheeky thing as well. It's pissing it pisses a lot of people off. So I know. And that's not and actually I would that my body would piss a lot of people off whether or not it's got this fucking tattoo on it or it,
Yeah. And
right?
that's an interesting thing is that it's a provocation in a way, but it's a provocation you can claim because it is literally a, you know.
Exactly. Yeah.
But I love that you call it sort of a lifelong performance
Yeah.
too, which gets into ideas about Blackness as as a performative act and kind of not a fact, but a performance, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. It's
Uh,
completely ever evolving, not and also blackness is that thing that we don't that gets used so often that we are still trying to figure out what it means, right? And this
right.
we talk about America or like these words, and I think that that's why your obsession with words and language that kind of explodes it or yeah pushes it to the point of abstraction is the phrase that you use, but there's something about I wanted to talk to you about out of languageness and how
Mm,
you, I think how so often there's like it's almost as if language isn't enough. And that's what I take a lot from your work that I also feel like in my own work that it's just not enough, but it's all that is. But I think that you do this thing where you drag as much out of it as possible.
right.
Right?
Yeah. Well, that's kind of you to say. I mean, I think it is in some ways, it's a kind of pessimism about language. And maybe that's come out of, being deeply invested in writers like Baldwin, whose project, particularly I would say in the essays, is to describe, make explicit, make clear the complexities of colonialism. He's living in Switzerland in the 50s and trying to think about what does it mean to be a Black body in this space
Uh-huh.
that, what does it mean to have a relationship to European culture, a culture that he says in the essay in some ways controls him. Um, Trying to, in 10 pages, make very, very complicated subject matter explicit, clear, think through it. Um, and in some ways failing because language will always fail at that. The complexity of what he's describing kind of exceeds language. And there's certain things that he does not say. He does not say, I am staying in the chalet of my lover's family. He does
Yeah.
not say that in the essay. So there's a burden, and not to say that like Baldwin was closeted, because he clearly was not, but it is not part of what is being reacted to by the villagers in the essay.
Right.
He focuses on his blackness and the sort of, he says, the wind that goes, travels with him when he comes through the village, the wind of outrage, of amusement, blah, blah, blah. But he's queer, And so if that were explicit, in some ways, that would be another kind of win too. But he doesn't deal with that in the space of the essay. So I think it's just thinking about how much can language say and what is beyond language, or where does it fail? Where does it break down? Is there something productive in the breakdown of language? Um, and I was thinking about that because you talk about images and how I'm still looking on my notes to get the right thing you say, but the image is a residue of experience.
Yeah. Right. Did
Um,
I say that? That sounds smart.
yes, which is fantastic way to say it. Like, you're taking pictures of friends, extended family, chosen family, it's about a kind of experience. The picture can never quite capture that. It's
Mm.
the experience that's the important thing.
Yeah.
So I love the idea that the picture is a residue. It's not the perfect moment sort of vision of like, oh, I snapped exactly at the right moment to capture these
Uh,
things.
no.
Like being, as you said, your tattoo is an ongoing performance. Taking pictures is ongoing too. You
Yeah.
know, it's about constructing meaning over time, you
Yeah.
know, doing dozens and dozens, hundreds and hundreds of photographs in order to get towards the idea of experience rather than like, oh,
Mm.
this single image captures everything about this moment, you know? Um, and I kind of love that in the way you think about displaying images, you're aware of, you know, that it's a question you grapple with.
Yeah,
It,
absolutely. I think that yeah, I wanted to talk to you about this again in terms of body because I struggle with there's so much body in my work.
Right.
And figuration, and I can't ever seem to get away from it. I don't know if I want to. I just keep coming back to it, or that it's just so I don't know, obviously that's what I'm figuring out. That's why I keep coming back to it because I haven't figured it out, I suppose. But you kind of have there again in terms of absence and yeah, invisibility and visibility. The figure is not there, but there you do things to for it that have like a slight presence, like the door paintings that you've done previously, or even just
Right.
having a Baldwin on repeat. It like summons
Yeah. Yeah.
it. There's
Yeah.
something in that, and I wondered how important is the body to you in your work, because especially if you with the painting, what's it called? The painting, the one that you used in the show.
But one of the phrases I've used is from a Zora Neale Hurston text, and it says, you know, I feel most colored when thrown against a sharp white
That's
background.
a body, you know? Yeah.
That's a body. And that you're right. Those paintings, you know, in some ways very influenced about debates that were going on in the UK in the 80s around depictions of bodies and voyeurism and looking at Black bodies. And so me thinking about text as a way of me figuring the body without actually depicting it. So a lot of the early paintings from the 90s have these texts that have the word I in it. I mean, it's very simple-minded in a way, but that I is about like, you know, the body and the shape of the canvases being on doors, you know, doors scaled towards to the human body was about this sort of idea of like, there's a body reference here without figuring the body. Um, and so that's been in the work a lot. But it's interesting that, you know, and I haven't really thought about this in this way, but the presence of Baldwin, because Baldwin is so much a body in a way, like the way when you
Body.
see him on TV, you know, his slightness, his gestures, his theatricality, you know, as much as his words, it's about how his body, you
Yeah.
know, is in these spaces. So it's curious, even though I've never really depicted Baldwin in my work, you're right that the use of his words over and over again invokes his body in a certain kind of way. That's,
Yeah.
oh, thank you.
Well, this is the thing is that, again, like a lot of your work is is made and then, you know, there's these clear patterns that come afterwards and nothing and it's almost accidental, but obviously there's so much purpose. But in the carbon and graphite Kozo paper
Right,
work,
right,
like
right.
in the museum, I thought this is one of the first times that maybe not one of the first times, but I thought movement in terms of I saw dance in,
Oh, interesting. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and I
Mm-hmm.
don't know where that comes from. Maybe because at some point in my life I attempted to paint and I wanted to paint. Same as you, I really wanted to be an abstract expressionist painter because I love abstract expressionism so much, but I think that I do use my own body somehow. And in dance to try and do this, I like in my films where I'm dancing, I'm slowing the images down so that it kind of abstracts movement, blah, 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 blah. But yeah, at some point I did try and paint. And when I saw these for the viewer, I
Oh, yeah.
thought
Yeah. Yeah.
there's like maybe it's a blurring, or maybe just the opacity is so dense in them. But there's,
Right. Yeah,
yeah,
interesting to think about that in relationship to work that I've seen of yours where there are bodies dancing
yeah,
and the register of like, lots of different registers, which is what I love about your work is that, you talk about, sort of dance as coming up in response in a way to political crisis, to repression,
yeah,
you know. And so these spaces where people are, dancing
yeah.
kind of as a kind of resistance to particular, political movements.
Yeah.
You were talking specifically about Northern Soul and the kind of utopian space that it
Hmm.
was making in the midst of like politically like, you know, the bad weather of the state, somebody said.
Exactly. Yeah.
Um, but also, I guess, riffing on what you said about Baldwin as a body, those prints were made by those drawings that you showed, these rubbing drawings were made by literally putting a piece of paper down on the surface of a painting that uses a Baldwin text and rubbing on top of it. So
Mhm.
it is about a kind of contact.
That's like, yeah, because that's like almost two Baldwins dancing together that make this other thing, this other language as well, which is, oh, I love it when a plan comes together. You must have.
Yeah, I've been thinking about rubbings for a long, long time, and never figuring out how to do that. And then sort of just a coincidence of finding the right paper, finding carbon, this water-soluble carbon as a medium that would blur when it contacts water because you have to wet the paper to actually make the rubbing because like if you're doing a rubbing off of a grave site, something like a tombstone, that's incised.
Mhm.
So it's a flat surface that's been incised into. So the rubbing is the surface, and
Yeah.
then the letters come up as a negative, a white space. This is the opposite. The painting is, has an impasto. The letters are raised.
Yeah.
And so I had to figure out like, oh, how do I make a rubbing on this thing that's raised? And I realized like, oh, okay, maybe, you know, this carbon and wet the paper and you're rubbing on the surface. And that's why it's in a way
Kind of
so
sex
abstract, but also the letters register. And that's kind of blurring that you were talking about. But you're really, it's about contact, you know.
contact. There's like a sexiness to that and like a queerness, like a it's kissing, they're kissing, and it's messy.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
just
I
like
mean,
snogging, as we would say in England.
yeah. Just to say one more thing is like, also very perceptive what you said because I've used Baldwin's text so long, I realized like Baldwin is the ground on which I would make my work, you
Mm,
know?
mm.
So imagine like a painting, you start with like a white ground and you paint something on top of it. It's like, oh, it's really that Baldwin is my ground. His words are the ground on which I make paintings
That's
now.
really beautiful.
Uh,
I did a show at South London Gallery called Upon This Rock, and
yeah.
it's quite a similar phrase. Upon this, it's actually comes from the I don't know what you call it, the like saying of the place that I'm from called Peterborough, and it's where Peter says to, or Jesus says to Peter, "Upon this rock I will build my church.
Oh, yeah. 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 Yeah.
Hell
Okay.
shall not prevail against
Mhm.
me." And that's kind of your Baldwin. And I think that, I was definitely aware that Peterborough is not the place where I'm building my work from. It's not safe enough, possibly,
Yes.
for me, because
Hmm. Hmm.
it hasn't provided that. But through that, we find so many different grounds and so many different rocks to build the work from that feels safer and like more knowing and not feel like home, I suppose. So that makes sense that, yeah,
Yeah. You were
yeah,
talking about pub culture, sort of working class pub culture. And and claiming that space as your own,
Which is
claiming
fine.
Petersburg as a domestic, a place where you grew up and that you
Yeah,
need to be away from in order to be who you are, to make your work. But
yeah.
it's also grounded in, I love in the interview where you talk about one of your aunts coming by, just like dropping by.
Yeah, I love that. And I literally said this to my friend the other day because I can't drive.
Yes,
I,
me
I
neither.
don't know how to drive, but I had keys on the table and I like left the house and I picked my keys up. And while I was still talking to my friend, I had my keys in my hand and I was like, oh my God, I'm having one of these moments.
Yeah.
An auntie who's just arrived somewhere who's going to be here for 10 minutes. Like it's the best feeling of that coming and going, but you can't uh I don't know, but there's still a yeah unsafeness to that, and I think that actually
Right,
um,
right.
I guess is circling back to the multiple truths and the trouble and the beauty, and I'm thinking about also all the beauty and the bloodshed, Nan Golding's title.
Oh, yeah. And her really that was an amazing documentary on her. Kind of her going, the filmmaker Laura Portra's going back to Nan's childhood and clearly how influenced she was by family story, but also her depiction of the chosen family.
Exactly.
Um, and yeah, the mix between those things is kind of extraordinary in that film, but painful too.
Painful, painful, and I think yeah, I don't ever know how to describe that so much to people. I get asked about that a lot, and I guess I don't know, listening to or researching you more thoroughly for this conversation has really helped me chill out about how much I need to have things figured out because the reason as to why we work is because we don't.
Yeah.
Yeah, I you speak about that a lot, I think.
But I mean, my sense of your practice, I was listening to an interview or a discussion you'd done for Kunsthal Wien,
So yeah,
where you're talking about Josephine Baker and how she was a catalyst for so much of the work there.
yeah,
Um, and I love how, well, a friend of mine said, "Oh, I don't work site specifically, I work site responsively," because site responsive is like the history of the institution, the history of the city, like who
yeah,
came there? Josephine Baker came there. What happened to Josephine when she came there?
yeah.
How can I use that so it becomes about like a way to envelop an entire history rather than like, oh, I'm just using the architecture of the space to make my work or something like that.
Yeah, you
Um,
totally get that from the show that you've done with the Fitzwilliam. I mean, you know that Cambridge is really close to where I grew up. It's like half an hour away.
oh, I
Yeah,
didn't.
I say it's half an hour away. I actually don't even know if that's true. I just know it's close. But I don't know. I think I'm from Cambridgeshire, so yeah, I think
Right, right, right. My geography is skewed by like watching bad British TV, like Grantchester, and
before we finish, I just wanted to talk about I Am a Man because
Hmm.
I have that tattooed, but I have it says I am a, like one day when I was younger, I was tattooing and it hurt so much. I was tattooing it on my leg and I couldn't finish it. So it wasn't that I didn't want it to say man, I just couldn't finish the tattoo because it was painful.
Wow, wow,
Really,
wow,
and
wow.
I never picked it up again. And obviously, since then, gender-wise, I don't think I identified as non-binary or didn't understand or didn't have that language actually at the time. Now I identify as non-binary, and it's humorous to me that I
It's
never.
that is fantastic. But is the tattoo based on those signs
Yeah, the
carried?
original sign. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. For those of in the audience who don't know, there was a strike in Memphis, Tennessee, in the United States, black sanitation workers who carried signs that said "I am a man," and it was a strike about they weren't being paid the same as their white co-workers. It's the march that Martin Luther King came to support when he was assassinated in 1968, and I made a painting that was based on those signs, but but also I also made some prints that were called the condition report prints, I believe, where I had uh, a friend who was a painting conservator do a condition report on that I Am a Man painting and sort of detail in pen on an image of the painting all the things you'd have to fix, quote unquote, if you were conserving the painting, as a way of thinking about, what would it mean in 1968 for Black sanitation workers to carry the sign that says, I am a man? What does it mean for me to make a painting of that sign?
Mm.
What does it then mean 10, 15 years later to make a set of prints that kind of deconstruct, like, or document the cracking and fissures in that image as a way to think about, how our ideas about history, civil rights movement, masculinity change over time, that these things aren't fixed in meaning, and they evolve and crack and fissure and get remade,
Which is why I always like wanted to tell you about this tattoo that it was too painful to get because I don't know when that must have been like when I did that like maybe 5 years ago. So when was that? I don't know. However many years after your condition reports came out, I obviously thought that meant something to me in that moment. Also, in the same way that like I think I was questioning this idea of being a man and a black man, especially, and understanding I had seen your work at that point. But yeah, I see that tattoo all the time, and it makes me laugh so much at that
it's
face.
the performance you carry
Yeah,
on your body. Another performance is
another
carrying on the
performance.
body. Yeah.
But I also just went on a dog walk before this and I was putting dog poo in a bin and I saw on the bin that it just said the word man that someone had written. And I thought, there it is. It's missing off my leg. I couldn't find it. There it is. It's on the bin.
Oh my God.
Again, funny in terms of translation and how these things start to mean different things, over time. Going back to the original or the neons that you have on the fits and where you specifically are talking about different translations of different things and how they can be swapped around and loved in some moments and hated in other moments.
But
Yeah.
also just in terms of translation, I mean, there in that neon piece on the facade of the Fit says 9 different translations of the last 2 lines of Cavafy's poem. And, when I was working on that piece, I realized that W.H. Auden had written the foreword to the first kind of famous English translations of those poems. And Auden says that the difference between prose and poetry is that prose can be translated and poetry cannot. So he has this skepticism about the ability, what is lost in the translation of poetry. And he fundamentally believes that language fails poetry and translation. But he says that Cavafy is the one poet he's found that survives the act. The act of translation does not diminish Cavafy's poem. So I love that Auden is, like in the preface to this book of poems, basically says like this is an impossibility.
I like that a lot. The impossibility, I think, is actually just a huge thing that we both work with actually, because
Right.
everything kind of comes from this idea of impossibility, almost an impossibility of, yeah, that translation, or impossibility of being black almost, or being American and being British and existing in all of these multitudes, and the impossibility of telling truth in that, or you know all of the above. But honestly, it's, yeah, you and this show has been really beautiful for me to
Uh,
return to those questions. So thank you so much.
well, thank you for the possibility of this dialogue and the possibility of seeing more of your work. I'm excited to have a show, in New York soon.
I was gonna come to New York. We were gonna do this like in person, but we can link up when I'm there.
Oh, we can definitely do this in person. I want that show invite,
Yes.
the date already.
Okay, girl, I got you.
Thank you again, Rin.
No, you're a true
Thank
blessing. A lovely way to round up 2024. Thank you.
you both.
Mwah.